The Department of Homeland Security is considering a reality show where immigrants compete for citizenship. That's a real headline. It's not a joke. Let's take a closer look. I'm Jenna, and this is Smarter News. Usually, I'll read an article and then I'm going to summarize it for you, give you some of the key points. But today, I think it would be helpful to just read from an article from the Wall Street Journal, because when I first saw this story, I actually wondered if it was real. And if I saw it in a different outlet, I might have just shrugged it off as a joke. But considering it was in the Wall Street Journal, and this is a headline, DHS is considering reality show where immigrants compete for citizenship, I thought we got to take a closer look at this. So let me just read the first paragraph. The Department of Homeland Security is considering being part of a television show in which immigrants would compete for potential U.S. citizenship. An idea the producer pitched as far back as the Obama administration. Let me keep reading. Department spokeswoman Tricia McLaughlin said she had spoken to the producer of the proposed television reality show and that consideration of the idea was ongoing. It is, quote, in the very beginning stages of that vetting process, she said, adding, each proposal undergoes a thorough vetting process prior to denial or approval. Should we keep going? Let's keep going. The pitch for the proposed citizenship competition show comes from Rob Warsoff, a producer and writer whose credits include the Duck Dynasty reality show. Warsoff, who immigrated from Canada, told the Wall Street Journal that the show is meant to be hopeful and a celebration of what it means to be an American citizen. Quote, this isn't the Hunger Games for immigrants, Warsoff said. Immigrants already in the system would compete in various contests, including potentially on American history and science. Warsoff stressed that losing contestants wouldn't face deportation. Quote, this is not, hey, if you lose, we are shipping you out on a boat out of the country. Okay, so what would this show be structured as? Apparently, the contestants would face something like this. They would be in San Francisco and they'd have to figure out how to mine for gold. They could be in Detroit and they may have to work on an assembly line and put together a Model T. These are some examples that were given in the Wall Street Journal. One of the most important parts of this article you actually get a little bit later on. It was mentioned at the top, but it is important here that this isn't a Trump era idea. Yes, this Department of Homeland Security that is currently working under this administration is more media savvy, you could argue, than others. They're using commercials, they're using social media to talk about their policies. But this idea actually goes back to the Obama administration, and Warsoff, the producer, said that he was talking about this show for both the Obama and Biden administration. So it's been bouncing around the Department of Homeland Security for a little while. It's yet to be greenlit, but because of this different posture of this administration politically, but also when it comes to media, the question is there an opening? What do you think about this? What do you think about the show? You know, why this caught my attention is because immigration remains so much in the spotlight. And the lack of consensus about how to manage immigration in America is really a bipartisan problem. It's really a bipartisan problem. Democrats and Republicans both have had opportunities. They've had the majorities in Congress. They've had the White House. They haven't been able to pass new laws. And it's not because they haven't wanted to, or there hasn't been momentum at times. It's just that they haven't been able to build the consensus around new legislation. And what's interesting about that is that they haven't been able to do it within their own parties. It's not like, hey, Democrats are all united on this one issue they're going to push forward, or Republicans have this policy that they're going to put forward. There's a ton of disagreement. And it's not usually along predetermined political lines. So it's a very fascinating story. And anecdotally, as I've covered these stories for years now, you know, there's just great disagreement about what immigration should look like in America, how it should be managed. And I have to ask the question now, where are the new ideas? Is this sort of out of the box thinking, for example, of a reality show, part of a solution of some sort to reset how America is engaging in immigration in that process? So it's a fascinating idea. We'll see if we see something like it move forward. We have no idea at this moment. But this article actually allows us to get into the news a little bit. And I wanted to show you, we actually have some brand new numbers when it comes to what's happening at our US borders. We have now 3 months of data under this new administration to take a look at, what's actually happening when it comes to border security. We know this is a huge part of President Trump's agenda. So what story do the numbers tell? So let's go ahead and take a look. I'm going to share my screen here with you because I want you to be able to see it with me and work through it together. Customs and Border Protection releases these monthly reports, and it allows us to track the data each month to understand, well, what's happening at the southern border, what's happening at the northern border. And so what you're seeing now on your screen is what's happening nationwide when it comes to the month of April. So in the month of April, we saw approximately 29,000 encounters at our borders. For context, last April, we saw 247,000. So a huge difference, a huge decline year over year. What does an encounter mean? It means that law enforcement has encountered someone coming across the border without legal status. And from that encounter, there can be several different paths. A person can be allowed to pursue asylum. They could be taken into custody. They could be removed. There could be all sorts of reasons. So this is why we use that term encountered. So in the month of April, 29,000 encounters. And if you look over the last several months, so February, March, and April, we're hovering right around that number each month, around 29,000. Let's take a closer look though. Let's go to just looking at the southern border, which is called the Southwest border by Customs and Border Protection. In April, we saw 12,000 encounters at the border. Now, just comparing it to last year at the same time, we had 179,000, just under 180,000 encounters at the southern border alone. This April, just over 12,000. So a huge decline, a huge difference. And again, a consistency that we're seeing. We had about just under 12,000 encounters in February, about 11,000 encounters in March, just over 12,000 in April. So a very consistent line. Let's take a look at the northern border. I think that's often sort of overlooked because there's so much attention in the southern border for obvious reasons. There's really big numbers, but there's been a story at the northern border too, because when we saw encounters rise, we saw it in the north as well as the south. And so if we just take a look at the month of April, we have about 4,800 encounters at the northern border compared to just under 17,000 last year at the same time. So we're seeing a picture being portrayed here just in the data of a massive historic decline. For context, in my time covering borders and border security and encounters and what's happening with immigration in America, I have never seen numbers this low, not in my career. Modern data collection, when it comes to the borders and what we can compare accurately, is probably about 4 or 5 decades. So it's not forever and ever. I mean, there will be those that will say these are the lowest border numbers that we've ever seen. And there's a question about what sort of data collection looked like, let's say in the 1800s. There's a limitation. So I like to say in modern data collection, just because I'm a journalist and I want to make sure I'm very precise with my language. But you may hear that, and that's one of the reasons why you're hearing it. I also want to show you this one part of the story too. I'm very curious about this. Unaccompanied children. So I can look at the demographics of who's coming across the border, who's being encountered. And the story of unaccompanied children is very interesting to me. This is those 17 and younger that are traveling without an adult. And in April, we saw just over 860, so 869 encounters of unaccompanied children. The year before, we just saw about just over 8,500. So a very big decline when it comes to unaccompanied children. Words to the wise, though, when it comes to this as well. When we think of an unaccompanied child, you may picture in your mind an 8-year-old girl. In reality, it's usually a teenager between the ages of 14 to 17 who's usually male. So just for perspective on that. Now, why is this happening? Let me show you this. Customs and Border Protection puts out a news release about this. And one of the things that they said is that they're seeing more decisive and effective immigration enforcement, so that they've been able to reach into areas that they haven't been able to parole as effectively before. And so this is one of the reasons that we're seeing these declines in encounters. But this is also interesting. So remember, someone that's encountered doesn't mean that they're able to stay in the United States. So just because you may see, 200,000 plus people encountered at our borders, it doesn't mean all 200,000 stay, but a portion do, and it can be a high number. So this is how we have this question about immigration and who's actually in the country and why are they here, and are they pursuing asylum? Is there another reason for it? So here's one of the things that Customs and Border Protection said. It said because of their their ability to patrol and enforce the law, they said only 5 illegal aliens, and that's a legal term, by the way, illegal alien. Only 5 illegal aliens were temporarily allowed into the United States in April for U.S. special interest court cases. So this could be, for example, pursuing asylum. A staggering drop from the roughly 68,000 released along the southwest border during the same month last year. So this is what Customs and Border Protection is saying. It's not just about the encounters dropping. It's that the number of people allowed to stay is also hugely lower compared to previous months or even previous years. So an interesting snapshot for us about the borders, and again, an opportunity for us to take a look at this story that still absorbs a lot of attention and touches a lot of different other stories that we talk about, whether it's immigration, the economy, national security, social services, all of it. Immigration, there's an immigration angle to a lot of these stories. And in general, why does any of this matter? Well, if we have fewer encounters, that means there's going to be fewer people in the country. Here are 2 questions, though, that come up for me when I look at these numbers, and we talked a little bit about it when I showed them to you. I am curious about the consistency of the numbers. So for the last 3 months, seeing that number of total encounters hover at 29,000, I'm curious about that. Is that a new normal? Is that what we should sort of expect? You know, if there's a red light on a road, you would expect a certain number of people to run that red light, no matter what the laws are, no matter how much you patrol that intersection. There's going to be a number of people that do that. So is 29,000 about what we should expect? And another way of asking that question is, why aren't we seeing continued declines? So if we got the number down to 29,000, then why isn't it 25,000? Why isn't it 20,000? Why do we not see the line going down instead of flattening out? I'm curious about that. And the second question I have is about those unaccompanied minors, those children. You know, what about that? Why is that taking place, and how significant is that? So these are 2 sort of storylines that I'd like to pursue. And again, we're able to take a look at 3 months. So we're looking at a trend rather than just a snapshot of this data. By the way, we just did a really interesting interview on immigration and immigration law. What does it take to actually become an American citizen, with an amazing immigration attorney? It just aired last week. Her name is Rachel Einbond. She does this every single day, trying to help people get their citizenship in America, but she's very serious about the law. And she kind of presented a few ideas for us too about what should be considered about new law or new policy that could be helpful when it comes to immigration in America. It's a really good foundational interview to listen to, because it fills in some of the blanks of what actually it takes to become an American citizen. Even if you're allowed to stay in the country, what does that look like? So bringing this all full circle, we have some new news out there. I'm glad we got a chance to look at that. And then the second thing is, what do you think about this idea of a reality show? Does it celebrate the the process of becoming an American citizen? Does it celebrate citizenship, or does it cheapen it? Do you think something like this in pop culture would be good? Or do you think it could actually be negative, reflect negatively on the country? All of our families have a story when it comes to immigration in America. It's one of the things that unites us. How would you feel about a family member competing in a show like that? What are your thoughts? I'm curious. Please email me hello@smarternews.com. Send a voice note if you want. It would be fun to play some of those as we continue to watch to see, will there be a development? I will absolutely let you know. If I see any news alert on that, you better believe it. We want to know if that's the case. In the meantime, thank you for your support of quick, concise, nonpartisan, Smarter News. Have a great day.